it's so amazing to see ASEAN, at least the youths, right, doing these very small acts of kindness. I'm not one to say that social media is, 100% good, 100% bad. We're just shades of gray, trying to do good, sometimes doing bad, right? It's just hopefully net at the end, you're just doing way more good so that you're leaving this world a bit better. And I think it was that very small act of, very small act of connection, you seeing someone and trying to give something to others. That was pretty powerful for me. And just seeing everybody else in Southeast Asia doing that was quite cool.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, good to see you. We're in person. Yeah. Live. There we go.
Live.
We were not AI generated, so that head cap got 5 fingers. So, no, it's good to see you in person again. And I think a lot has happened over the past month.
That's an understatement.
There was this very large protest. Yeah. And I think it was interesting is that we were actually discussing in the last episode, right before the protest happened, talking about how there's a huge trust gap between, I think, the middle class and the government. And we said that there were conditions that were just not right. And obviously that has kind of like erupted in street protests and so forth. So, but I think maybe from your perspective, could you recap what happened?
Yeah. So I was in the ground. I was in Indonesia when it all happened. And it started out with a series of smaller scale protests. So there was a protest by the labor movement. There was another protest regarding conditions in the economy and trust issues with the government in general due to expansion of TNI or the military involvement in civilian projects or in state-sponsored projects. And so there's a lot of pushback. And then there were this onslaught of dissatisfaction that was expressed very publicly by multiple layers of society about the DPR, which is our parliament, about the DPR's increased allowance, especially what was famous is this housing allowance, which will give them about $3,500 US a month net for housing, for rent or whatever. Just FYI, GDP per capita of the country is 5,000. So this is way above and beyond typical average salary of a person, right?
7 times.
That's just housing. It's not the actual salary. Okay. So all in, I think all of the salary would have amounted to $20,000 US, and it's net. So because they're part of the government, they're not taxed on top of that, right? So people are just, this is $20,000 a month. Yeah, no.
It's $240,000 USD
per year
salary.
This is salary plus. So like the way it works is you get a base salary and then you get allowances for things. So some of the allowances that people thought were crazy were rice allowance. You get, I don't know, a couple $100 or up to 1,000 of rice allowance. Yeah. And I don't know what you're doing with that much rice per month.
Like, I'm doing the math and I'm like, wait, the GDP per capita is $5,000.
Yes, correct. That's $5,000, not a month, $5,000 a year.
So the average GDP per capita of Indonesian is $5,000 per year. And the salary is
$200,000. Of parliament members were close to about $200,000 a year.
That would be the equivalent of, I guess, in Singapore, America, the average GDP per capita is about 70,000. So 50x would be about getting paid 3.5 million per year. But is it considered like a full-time job? Can you work with other jobs? So,
about that. It is technically a full-time job, but people do other things too because of how porous our legal system is, which is something I've talked about multiple times, how there are so many gray areas in our legal system. So for example, a vice minister can be a commissioner of a state-owned enterprise.
like have like a double hatting.
Yeah, like a double hatting, which is, I think, where it gets people very riled up is, again, when you're in a country where the GDP per capita is still very low, and then there are not enough economic reforms that allow people to trade freely and also just get jobs much more easily. Again, 1 in 4 youths in Indonesia are not in employment, training, or school.
Oh, no.
So it's a very high number, right? And when the statistic board said, oh, that's not true, our employment rate is actually very high, the question becomes, how do you define employment? Because in Indonesia, there's also an extremely high rate of informal employment, right? So your gig drivers, your daily laborers, and if you count that as employment, sure, then I guess it's high. It's a very high rate. Then your unemployment rate may be at 5%, but they don't have the same level of job security, right? They don't have the same level of job security, benefits, all of that. So their lives are still extremely, extremely tough. So you combine this situation of the parliament making such a large delta of salary and benefits versus the average person. And then several members of the parliament said some things in relation to that was just very negative. So one person said, anyone who criticize what DPR members make are idiots. Or, there are people who said, well, I'm okay getting this housing benefit. I think it's completely fair because my house is very far from my office in Jakarta. And that was considered tone deaf for very obvious reasons. Right. I mean, it's not hard to figure.
Politics is about saying stuff about the leadership and also not saying stupid stuff.
Well, a really big piece that's missing here is empathy. It's something I've seen since actually months ago even. There seems to be this lack of empathy of really understanding that people are hurting and people don't have time to watch government officials to finally do the right thing and finally have great results because people are very objectively, literally hurting in every way, economically, health-wise. Everything. And so when there was a series of protests, the problem was there wasn't a lot of response to that protest. So it was, government officials saying, oh, things are fine. You just have to give us time. And they, again, seemed tone deaf until one night, and I was in Jakarta when this happened, a very public video of a Gojek driver that was sending food to just being a Gojek driver, sending food delivery, was hit by the police with a tank, basically. And it's very, very visual. And it's all caught on camera. And that was when the next day everything erupted. Again, for a good reason, right? And I think it was then that finally government officials realized that this is not a game, that people are extremely angry. And so what happened next was a wave of a wave of restrictions. A lot of military and the police were coming into the streets too to manage and regulate. And it really just became this massive unrest in 33 cities. And then there were burnings of some buildings and public facilities, which were considered not necessarily the action of the demonstrators, because a typical demonstrator wouldn't burn things that demonstrators use, like train stations and buses, right? Because they're public facilities that are helpful. So with all this unrest, with all this very, very legitimate and valid anger, finally, the government started speaking up, also because there were mass lootings of government officials' houses. DPR houses were actually raided by lots and lots of people. Unfortunately, there were also other houses that, were raided, including the Ministry of Finance at the time and lots of others. So basically, the message was change something, change it fast. In a way, some stuff happened because they had to happen immediately. If not, we would just go straight into, even more unrest. And the really big one was there were this document called Tuntutan, and which means what the people requested. The headline for that is called 17 plus 8 because that's the amount that people were asking for. But when I say people, it's not also representative of all people, because how do you also create something that's representative of 285 million people? But that is the most widely circulated one. For the most part, they were pretty pointed. So for example, it asked DPR members to have a salary hikes and to have basically a much lower rate of salary and benefits. It then asked for more inclusion of public participation in the creation of undang-undang or the law. Also asked for a limitation of TNI, the military, in public spaces, in projects, civilian projects, etc. It basically asked for many, many things. But the real gist of that entire situation was, government, please listen to people who are hurting. So more free speech, so more freedom of press, more more avenues for the people and the DPR and the government to interact. And really, it's that. And I think the big aha moment in this entire movement is finally lots of people are waking up that politics affect their everyday lives. I mean, it's really that, right? And I think that's usually, sorry to say, when people who come from honestly, people like me, right? Like more elite backgrounds, educated, speak English, all of that. We sometimes feel that we're separate or apart from all these, but we're not. It affects every single person who's a resident or a citizen and are living in Indonesia and who love Indonesia. And another interesting aspect of this is the increased movement of the diaspora. So Indonesians who live abroad, who study abroad, or they're citizens of the United States, European Union countries, all of those, they've actually gone down to their embassies and their public parks and spaces and spoke for a better Indonesia. So now, as we look forward, there's this concept called Reset Indonesia. It's a hashtag. There are also different variations of this. They're not the only one. But what we see is this decentralized movement simply because people are exhausted with where the policies are taking them.
For me, it's like something that I read in the news, right? And I think obviously you see some of the videos. I watched that video of the poor Gojek driver getting run over. And, I think it's something that you look at this and you're just like, this is the stuff that happens, right? At some level, it's like, yes, it's chaos, it's randomness. But on the other side, like you said, mechanistically, if there's a lot of frustrated people who feel like they're unheard, they're going to protest. There's going to be good faith actors who try their best. And then there's going to be bad faith actors. Any protest in America, in any country in the world. And then obviously, like how you respond to it is going to be like the make or break component. And whether you call it good politics or you call it good crisis management, but how you handle it is going to be the part that's important. Right? Not an easy topic at all. And, I think, it makes me wonder this, one big question is like, what are the lessons or things to take away from this?
Yeah.
Because I think a protest is like a, scream from the unheard, right? In that sense, right? And it's just
completely
something that happens often, it's like tip of the iceberg, right? It's like, there's a big thing underneath the water. But what are the key takeaways from this entire crisis?
The cost of this was extremely clear. And I mean, not the cost of what the demonstrators bring, because again, they're valid. It's the cost of what happens when empathy is not expressed in politics and when you make rules and regulations. And the cost of what happened starting in end of August until now is more than 6,000 people have been arrested. I lost count of how many thousands of people are injured. 10 people were killed. And so the cost is extremely clear, right? Until today, almost 1,000 people, if not more, actually, we've lost track because so many have been arrested supposedly due to anarchy actions or whatnot, right? Unfortunately, there's also a group of children who are currently detained, which I don't know what the logic is, but here we are, right? So I'm hoping there's something that came out of it. There were lots of changes. I probably can't even blurt out all of them because there's been a lot in a way, right? So for example, a lot of political parties have made public statements saying that they will be on the side of the people, which for lots of people, they would go, well, yeah, of course. And then I went, well, if you've seen the way the politics have been played, the mass and just people in general don't feel that these political parties represent them. Yeah. They feel that the political parties are all playing a game, a political maneuver, and somehow the people's wishes may not always be front and center, right? Yeah. You can see this in other countries. Indonesia is not different, to be honest. So political parties have expressed that they will be on the side of people. And then, the finance minister was reshuffled. So now it's a new guy. And currently he's polling quite well. He started out quite rough in the beginning, just like, I guess, lots of people, lots of ministers who start out, they usually start out with people not trusting them. But this current minister seems like he has good ideas. He expresses them. And I think people like the way he expressed things because they're very honest. He is very unfiltered. Yeah. He is very unfiltered. And people like that because I think what people are looking for is empathy and just something genuine. People are just trying to grasp at, are you genuine? Right? So we have a new finance minister, and then, supposedly there will be more oversight for the free lunch program that is deeply political and controversial in Indonesia for many reasons. And so, yeah, there are some changes here and there. But again, the question is how fast can those changes come and how much cost will they incur? And when I mean cost, I mean not just money, but actually the most important part, which is the well-being and the social justice of the people.
I think one thing, obviously, is really the economic piece of it, right? And I think, the biggest driver, at least from the analysis, I think they feel like, obviously, one is economic growth is not as fast as it should be. I think that's one way of thinking. But two is they feel like it's getting worse, right? And so I think that
they're not wrong.
So, but I think what I find tricky is like some of the reports have conflicting points of view, which is what people feel like is the economy is getting worse. But it feels like the
official numbers,
it feels like it's growing slowly.
Sure.
So what's the lived reality?
Right. So I think what makes it very, very hard, again, is the government is already starting at a trust deficit in the country. That includes official numbers because a lot of people now, including not just, Gita doing a podcast, but also consulting companies, research bodies, independent organizations, they are questioning official government numbers because, like, as I said before, no, our unemployment is very low. And then the question is, how do you define employment? If it includes informal employment, yeah, it's very low. But if you just find formal employment with healthcare involved and all of that, maybe the number is actually high. There are still waves of layoffs, especially with what just happened with the Ministry of Energy and the, big issues with imported gasoline and fuel into the country. And there's just a lot of these other issues in all the different sectors, whether you're in energy or whether you're in SMEs, there's just so many of these problems. So for example, today, I just found out several hours ago that TikTok was banned. And I can only imagine what the tens of millions, at least, in lost revenue by SMEs who sell through TikTok Shop and TikTok Live. I can only imagine. So I think it's all of those very real economic issues. And I'm not even talking trickle-down economics. I'm just talking very real economic problems that makes it hard for an average person to either A, get a job that pays them well, a living wage, and humane conditions, or two, if they were to start a business, an SME, how do they maintain consistent revenue where they can employ people, grow, thrive, get access to credit financing and all of that so that they continue to build better lives for their families? I really worry about those. And right now, I'm not quite sure what strong economic policies or deregulation that is happening that would help any of those two.
I think there's a part that's tough, right? Which is structural reform is the hardest part of
always
like unlocking the economic growth. I think there's easy wins, which is lowering interest rates.
Right, of course.
Easy wins, there's a stimulus and everything. But I think that's the tricky part. And I think the middle income economy trap is very real, of course. But it feels like there's so many quick wins that Indonesia could still do because, but as you say, Indonesia is a middle income economy.
I
think there's still quite a lot of easy wins.
So, for example, one of the quicker wins, I wouldn't say very quick, but maybe one of the quicker wins was the one that was mentioned by several economists in the past about deregulation and just making it easy for businesses to set up shop in Indonesia. I mean, it's just very straightforward.
Just make it less forms, less painful, more streamlined.
Yeah. So that's fairly easy.
You could do it in 9 months.
Hopefully, right?
You put everybody in a room.
Yeah, but again, I think what the protests are hopefully starting to bring out into the light is that politics affect everyday people and it affects everyone. So when we're talking about the economy, it's not this concept that only people who study economics understand or people who study economics can give a commentary on. It's really basic questions on if I were an SME in Indonesia, how easy it is for me, for example, to incorporate into an LLC so that the finances is not in my personal bank account name in BCA or BNI or Mandiri, right? These are just basic questions that I think often gets ignored because the other things are flashier. It is flashier to give, for example, we call it bansos, which is social support, which is also needed. Don't get me wrong, but it is flashier to just give an extremely large aid package rather than ensuring that economic cycles happen in every layer of society. So not just the conglomerates with their very large cap listed companies, but also people at the grassroots level. How easy it is for them to set up a small business, how easy it is for them to get access to financing again, how easy it is for them to trade. What if they want to trade to international buyers? Yeah, right? Because when we think international buyers, we often think, oh, you must be a large startup backed by a VC. No, I'm talking about carpenters in Java who can sell their furniture abroad and probably make a better margin if they want to. But again, these are the questions that are often just not answered.
Yeah. And I think you also mentioned about TikTok, currently going through a regulatory
review.
Effectively a soft ban in short term. So I think what's interesting was that the factual part of it is that it sounds like chronologically what I've read from the news is that TikTok was being used, especially TikTok Live was being used during the protests in terms of coordination, donations, diaspora, news gathering, community organizing. I understand that the government has requested for data from TikTok about who was live streaming, IP addresses, who donated or gave money.
Whatever it is they requested.
Yeah. And then they felt that TikTok didn't give that data. And then so now they've relooking at the license of TikTok being able to operate in Indonesia. So
I have no access to what the government asked TikTok. I don't work there. Oh, I have no, I'm not privy to it at all. But it seems that from all the reports, the government asked for data on the TikTok engagement between August 25 to August 30, which is happens to be in the same time as the civil unrest. Do with that information what you want, right? And because the government now deems that TikTok hasn't quite responded fully, and also there was another potential cause, which is they said, we want to protect our SMEs. I'm not quite sure. And then supposedly there's rumors of, no, this is because they wanted to see if anyone was doing online gambling. And online gambling is a very big problem. It's a huge social problem in Indonesia in general. So again, no one knows, but do with the information what you will. And now supposedly there's been a freeze on at least parts and features of TikTok. But my biggest concern is the TikTok Live and the TikTok Shop features, because so many SMEs just use that for up to 90% of their income. Like, it's just such a huge part of their sales method, such a huge part of their go-to-market strategy. So I really hope that whatever step is being taken right now, that we also think of, I don't even know, the millions of SMEs that are suffering. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting dynamic because during the protests, I think that TikTok actually shut down its live component, and after that it went back up. And because the people were asking for it, I mean, not people, I was using the word people is very large, but there's a very big outcry for it to be restored. And of course now, I'm sure that from my perspective, it's quite interesting because I was like, if you're TikTok's public policy team, it's really not an easy.
No. I don't envy the public policy and government relations team right now at all. It's a tough, it's a place to walk, because Indonesia also has several laws that over time probably can be used to either leverage or benefit certain groups much more than the rest. So a very famous one is about this law that you cannot, in a way, portray other people in a very negative light. Like, so it's a type of, I don't even know how to explain it, but
it's like defamation.
Yeah, like a defamation, but it's very slippery.
Oh.
It's a very slippery argument. So for example, you can actually get under this law if you create, let's say, a very negative review of a skincare clinic.
Wow.
But what does that even mean, right? I mean, I don't know, because what if it's real? What if, the treatment really did bring about something very negative? So that definition of this particular law, for example, is very odd. Another odd one is it's an outdated 1961 law on fundraising. So supposedly, if you want to fundraise for anything at all, like medical needs of people, legal help, all of that, you would need a permit from someone or from something. Supposedly that is to protect consumers or to protect people who donate. But at the same time, since this is from 1961, so think of the context. 1961 was before there was a working, clear democracy in the country, right? So why was there such strong laws on fundraising? So like, what if you fundraise, for example, what if you fundraise for your family members who had a terrible accident? Then do you need a permit? How do you get that permit? How does this work? Like what areas does this cover? And I think it's that there's a lot of legal uncertainties, or gray areas is more like it. And that can be weaponized over time or leveraged. And I think that is the part where, structural reforms are needed. More transparency, more public participation is needed throughout, and should be the lesson of this entire civil unrest.
Yeah. I think it's just really interesting because, I think TikTok reminds me very much effectually like, Facebook, right? And Facebook very much was a big player in, for example, the Arab. And I think it's interesting because every new communication medium seems to generate its own form of community organizing.
Oh, sure.
And that form of community organizing shows up in political unrest. And I think it's been interesting to see because I think TikTok, like, in the broader context, is they're fighting like a multi-front regulatory. In America, I think they recently agreed to sell the TikTok US to a consortium of American folks. So that's one thing. See, we know that India is totally banned TikTok, as well as Nepal. And then obviously we have other countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, that also banned TikTok as well. So I think it's interesting to see that. I just think that it's going to be interesting because I'm just kind of curious how it all shakes out, to be honestly. Like, it's not an easy regulatory question.
And again, all of these platforms, we must remember, are managed by corporations. So they're managed by corporations. They look for profit. Profit comes in the form of our attention, our focus on it. And I think this is what makes participatory democracy challenging in today's time, right? It's not as simple as, every voice matters, we listen, because voices can be distorted through platforms, obviously, right? And also a lot of countries, we have to understand that, the constitution, laws, and amendments of so many countries are alive today. They're not set in stone. They're not necessarily some 10 commandment type things that are unshakable. Like, so many of these laws and constitution are alive today, and the people still have power in shaping where it goes. But I think this is the part that makes everything very complicated, because with social media platform, more individualism, and just people not connecting as people. We forget people. We forget each other. That it makes democracy actually quite shaky and not as firm as people think of it as an ideal and a value. One of the big things that happened to me personally during the entire thing was there was this small thing where a bunch of friends said, hey, we can treat Gojek and Grab drivers and their friends and their families to food on the app. Maybe we can just buy them food. And it was just very simple. And then we found out that so many people that did this in the country, but so did Singaporeans, so did Malaysians, so did Filipinos. They downloaded the Grab or Gojek app and bought people food and just it's so amazing to see, ASEAN, at least the youths, right, doing these very small act of kindness. And it's just this small act of kindness and connection. So the Grab driver I bought food for, he took a picture of him giving food to his friends. And they took like a picture, all 5 of them going like this. And it was just, like nice to see. Like, it's a connection. And then I asked how they're doing. I hope they like the food. And it's just, you see these interactions happening. So I'm not one to say that social media is, 100% good, 100% bad, because many things are not 100% good or bad. Humans are also not always 100% good or bad, right? We're just shades of gray, trying to do good, sometimes doing bad, right? It's just hopefully net at the end, you're just doing way more good so that you're leaving this world a bit better. And I think it was that very small act of, very small act of connection. I wouldn't even call it kindness. It's just connection, right? You seeing someone and trying to give something to others. That was pretty powerful for me. And just seeing everybody else in Southeast Asia doing that was quite cool.
Well, on that hopeful note, I hope that things continue to grow. And I think feels like, I think the 3 takeaways I got from this conversation, one is like, you and I have been discussing on this podcast for a long time about the things that need to change. And it sounds like a lot of it boiled over really in terms of economic growth, in terms of feeling disconnection or trust deficit. Hopefully that can be seen factually. I think that's one. 2 is, I think quite clearly this the protests have resulted in this law and order crackdown, and so I think the country has to process what is the right steps moving forward as well. Right. The third thing is that I think technology and communication platforms are such a huge part of this entire story, and I think that's the final chapter, and this hasn't been written yet.
Yep, you're right. I like that. It hasn't been written yet.
Yeah, we'll find out.
We'll find out.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, let's wrap up and see you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.